Chapter 1. The night I woke up, the hum of the station's engines was a constant, low vibration beneath the metallic floor, a comforting presence that echoed through the narrow hallways of Eli Mercer's quarters. As a mechanic, he was used to the noise, had even come to depend on it. But tonight, it felt almost intrusive, as if the hum itself were trying to wake him. He shifted in his bunk, his sheets tangled around his legs, the faint glow from the star station's lights filtering through the small window overhead, casting long shadows across the room. Then he felt it, a weight, subtle but undeniable, pressing down on him. He blinked awake, heart racing. Someone was on top of him. His breath caught in his throat, and his first instinct was to push the intruder off, but his hands met nothing solid. The sensation was strange, soft but firm, as if there was a pressure but no body. Panic surged through him. Was an intruder? A malfunction in the station's AI? But no, his mind cleared. This was real, not a dream. He opened his eyes wide, only to find Syrala, his alien roommate, leaning over him, her skin shimmering faintly in the dim light, the dark irises of her eyes wide with a mix of confusion and urgency. Her breath was shallow, her body unmoving, as though frozen in time. Eli's pulse quickened. "Syrala," he rasped, his voice hoarse with sleep. The room felt colder, and yet there was a palpable heat between them, a shared space that hadn't existed before. Syrala blinked, her elongated ears twitching in the silence. Slowly, she sat back, her thin frame still draped over him. Her features, though soft and almost feminine by her species standards, were striking, sharp angles, the glowing skin of the Kareth Dominion, her long, segmented arms like delicate, ethereal sculptures. But right now, she wasn't the cold, proud warrior he was used to. She was disoriented. I didn't mean," she stumbled over her words, her voice strained, her normally smooth, confident tone now filled with vulnerability. Eli pushed himself up, still half disoriented from sleep, but his body quickly woke up to the sudden tension in the air. He looked at her face closely. The alien woman's expression was a mixture of bewilderment and something else he couldn't quite place. "What were you doing?" His voice was steady, but the words caught in his throat. Something about the situation felt wrong, but not in the way he expected. "I don't know," Syrala admitted, her eyes flitting around as though trying to make sense of her own body. "I must have wandered." She seemed to struggle with the right word in common, but the meaning was clear. "I do not sleep like you." Eli swallowed, unsure how to respond. The idea of sleepwalking hadn't occurred to him. It made sense in a way. Syrala's species, with their heightened instincts, their battle-driven customs, didn't have the same need for rest as humans. She was a warrior, trained to function on little sleep, always alert. Yet here she was, vulnerable and confused, atop him as if pulled by something other than her will. You're not in control?" Eli asked, his eyes still locked on hers, trying to read the emotion she struggled to suppress. Syrala lowered her gaze. "No," she whispered. "It is not my choice. This proximity, it is instinct. My people bond in such ways during moments of stress." Eli felt the pulse of 100 questions rushing to his lips, but none of them seemed to matter. He couldn't quite fathom it, her people, so different, so far removed from humanity's own experience. To them, something like this might be entirely normal, but to him, the heat of her body so close to his, the sheer alienness of her presence, sent a ripple of discomfort through him. But as he looked at her again, really looked at her, he saw something unexpected. Syrala's pride had been shattered, her fierce, distant demeanor replaced by vulnerability. This wasn't a proud warrior from Kareth. This was someone who didn't understand what was happening to her, someone just as lost as he felt at this moment. I didn't mean to," Syrala began again, but Eli interrupted her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder, a small but meaningful gesture. "It's fine," he said softly. His voice carried more certainty than he felt, but in that moment, it felt like the only thing he could offer. "I'm not mad. Just don't do that again." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The hum of the station, the faint metallic tang of air recyclers, the dim flicker of distant lights, all seemed to fade into the background. Eli's heart slowed as he tried to make sense of the situation. They weren't enemies. They weren't even acquaintances, really. Just two souls trapped in the same metal box in space. And yet, he felt a stir of something else, an understanding. The weight of the galaxy outside felt just a little less heavy now. Syrala slowly nodded, her gaze softer than he had ever seen it. She didn't speak for a long time, and when she did, her voice was quieter, more introspective. "I will try," she said simply, and though the words didn't carry much promise, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that something between them had changed in the stillness of that night. The engines hummed on, and in the silence that followed, Eli found himself unsure whether they had just shared an awkward, tense moment or something that might shape the future. Chapter 2, Unlikely Companions. The following morning, the station was buzzing with activity. Crew members drifted through the narrow hallways in their jumpsuits, the hum of overhead lights and the metallic clang of boots on polished floors filling the air. Eli had barely managed a few hours of sleep after the strange encounter with Syrala. His mind buzzed, replaying the event from a night before, unsure of how to process them. The space station, the Alderaan Gateway, a hub for interstellar trade and diplomacy, felt bigger today. Its metallic walls seemed to close in on him as he moved through the corridors, his steps echoing too loudly in his ears. He passed the usual crew members, exchanging quick nods, but his thoughts were a million miles away. His shift as a mechanic started soon, but the thought of what happened with Syrala gnawed at him. It was after lunch that things started to get weird. As Eli entered the engineering bay, a few of the crew glanced his way and whispered. He could hear snatches of words, though they were too far away to catch fully. His palms began to sweat. It wasn't uncommon for rumors to fly around the station, especially in such a close-knit community, but these felt different. "Did you hear? Eli Mercer and the Karath woman. Not what I expected. Saw them together last night. What are they even doing? Not the human way." Eli felt a flush creep up his neck. The whispers intensified as he walked past the crew, and before he could make it to his workbench, Jenna, one of the junior engineers, intercepted him. Syrala's eyes met his with an unreadable expression. She didn't speak right away. There was no smirk or a prideful glance, just a cool detachment of someone used to being in control. She walked up to him, her movements fluid, as though gravity didn't quite affect her as it did humans. The two of them stood there in the middle of the bay, the tension between them palpable. Then, unexpectedly, Syrala broke the silence. Her voice was softer than usual, no longer the clipped, authoritative tone she used when speaking with the rest of the crew. "Eli, there are rumors." Eli shifted on his feet, the back of his neck prickling. "I notice. Some say—" Syrala hesitated, her gaze flicking to the side, where the crew was trying to pretend they weren't listening. "That you and I are—" She trailed off, her alien manner of speech struggling to find the right word. The awkwardness was thick, but Eli caught a glimpse of vulnerability in her eyes. Syrala, the proud, powerful warrior from the Karath Dominion, was unsure of herself in this moment. "They think we're something else?" Eli ventured, his voice dry. Syrala nodded, her lips tight. "There's a bond, yes? But not one I invited. I have never shared proximity with a human. It is not done." Eli could sense the conflict in her words, the struggle between her warrior instincts and the alien nature of their cultures. But he wasn't a fool. He had been a part of enough tense diplomatic discussions in his years aboard the station to recognize the weight of her hesitation. The Kareth, with their fierce pride and warrior traditions, would never allow a cross-species bond to form without serious repercussions. And for Syrala to be here, on a human station, isolated, meant something was wrong in her world. "You're worried about what people are saying," Eli said softly, his tone not accusatory but understanding. Syrala didn't reply right away, her gaze drifting downward. "It is not just what people say, Eli. It is what they will do when they find out." A heavy silence fell between them. The station's engines hummed softly in the background, a familiar, mechanical lullaby that had never sounded so distant. Eli glanced around. The crew had scattered, but their eyes still lingered, like they were waiting for a fight to break out. Or maybe they were just hoping to see something unfold. Well, then, Eli began trying to regain control of the situation. "Let them talk. We're not here to entertain them. I'm not about to let their words get to me." Syrala's eyes lifted, narrowing slightly in surprise. "You would defend me?" Eli met her gaze directly, his voice steady. "I'm not about to let a few rumors mess with what's real. And I don't need to explain myself to anyone." A slow, almost imperceptible shift passed over her face. The defensive walls she always put up lowered slightly, and for the first time, Eli saw a glimmer of gratitude there, a flicker of something softer. Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did not expect this from a human." Eli shrugged, his hand brushing against a loose wire on his workbench as he gave a small smile. "Don't expect too much. I'm just trying to keep things from blowing up in our faces." The quiet moment lingered before the sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the hallway. Syrala stood a little taller, regaining some of her composure. But there was something different in the way she held herself now. Something less distant, more human. "You're welcome to work with me today," Eli said as the crew began to filter back into the engineering bay, his voice lighter. "Let's give them something to talk about." Syrala raised an eyebrow, a subtle smirk playing at the corner of her lips. Perhaps this will be interesting. As the two of them began to work together on the station's repairs, the tension between them remained, but so did something else, a shared understanding. They weren't just two species in a confined space anymore. They were unlikely companions, caught in a strange moment neither of them could fully explain. And somehow, that made all the difference. Chapter 3, Between Blades and Sparks. The station's main reactor hummed with a steady thrum as Eli worked beneath the flickering lights of the engineering bay. He was crouched on his knees, face half buried in the maintenance panel of a plasma conduit, when the shrill alarm rang out across the station. The shriek of the siren was followed by the sharp hiss of an intercom. "Attention! Attention! Security breach detected in Sector 12. All personnel report to their stations. I repeat, security breach in Sector 12. Eli's heart skipped a beat. He dropped the tool he'd been holding, the clatter of metal against concrete ringing in his ears. His mind immediately began to race through a list of possible scenarios. Pirates? Sabotage? A malfunction in the station's critical systems? But the thought of Syrala's safety gripped him like a vice. Without a second thought, he bolted from the bay, the sound of his boots echoing off the walls as he sprinted through the narrow corridor. He didn't know why, but he needed to find her. He needed to know she was all right. As he turned a corner, he nearly collided with Syrala, who was already moving with the precision of a trained warrior. Her angular features were tense, her body a spring-coiled to strike, and her eyes burned with purpose. "Eli," she said, her voice tight, "you need to stay clear. It's not safe." Eli didn't stop. "What's going on?" he demanded. Syrala's gaze flickered the hall behind her, where a flashing red light cast an eerie glow. The emergency alarms were blaring now, drowning out everything except the sound of their own breathing. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached for the blade sheathed across her back. Kalar, a traditional weapon of her people. Its sleek, silver blade seemed to shimmer, a faint hum emanating from the metal. Syrala glanced back at Eli. They're not here for us, but they'll kill anyone who stands in their way. Without waiting for an answer, she sprinted ahead, her feet barely touching the floor as she moved with inhuman grace. Eli hesitated, but only for a second. His instinct screamed at him to follow. He grabbed the nearest tool, a makeshift blaster, and charged after her. They raced through the labyrinth of corridors, the sound of their footsteps drowned out by the chaos that erupted around them. The station was locked down, sections of it shuddering to contain the threat. But the attackers were quick, too quick. As they neared Sector 12, Eli saw them. 3 masked figures, clad in dark armor, stood in the doorway of the reactor room, laser rifles slung across their backs. They were in the process of slicing through the security gate, their tools flashing with sparks. Syrala was the first to act. She charged at them, the collar drawn and gleaming in her hands. The raiders didn't even have time to react before she was upon them. Her movements a blur as she expertly deflected a blaster shot with the curve of her blade and incapacitated the first man with a swift strike across his chest. Chapter 4. The Weight of Honor. The stars outside the station's viewport flickered like distant diamonds, each one a small, glowing promise of the vast unknown. The soft pulse of artificial gravity hummed through the metal walls, keeping everything grounded, but inside Eli's chest nothing felt steady. As he looked at Syrala, standing tall, her Kareth warrior's cloak billowing slightly as if caught in a breeze that wasn't there, he felt the weight of something much heavier than gravity pressing on his shoulders. The Alderaan gateway had never felt so far from home. They were about to board a ship bound for the Kareth Dominion, Syrala's home. The call had come from her people. She was to return and face trial. Word of her dishonor had spread beyond the station's walls, reaching the ears of her clan's leaders, and now it was time for her to answer for it. They couldn't have known what happened between her and Eli, not exactly, but they would see the human woman's proximity as a breach of Kareth tradition. Syrala had tried to tell Eli this was the end. She would face the trial alone, and he should remain behind. But Eli had made up his mind long before she finished speaking. She might have been a warrior, proud and fierce, but Eli was no stranger to fighting for what he cared about, and what he cared about now was Syrala. "I'll go with you," Eli had insisted, his voice steady. He hadn't even known why, but the word had felt right, like they were always meant to be said. "You don't have to face this alone." She had said nothing for a long time, her eyes unreadable. Her people valued strength and pride above all else, and his words, his offer to stand by her, were foreign, even uncomfortable. But in the end, she had given a single silent nod. The decision was made. And now, as they boarded the Kavalan, a sleek, black warship from her people, it felt like the weight of her entire world was bearing down on both of them. The ship's interior was stark and intimidating, its walls of polished black metal reflecting the harsh light of overhead lamps. The floor vibrated beneath Eli's boots as the ship powered up. Everything inside the Kavalan was designed for battle. The corridors were narrow, and the air was thick with the scent of metal and alien perfumes. His mind wandered back to Earth, back to the smells of fresh air, grass, and open fields. But those thoughts felt distant now. He was far from home, and even farther from understanding the complex customs and politics of the Kareth. Syrala stood by the viewport, her figure silhouetted against the stars. Her Kareth features were always striking, but today her posture was less regal and more burdened. She wasn't the confident warrior Eli had first met. Now she seemed smaller somehow, vulnerable. What's going to happen? Eli asked, stepping closer, his voice low and calm. Syrala didn't turn to face him immediately. Her hands were clasped behind her back, the movement a silent sign of her discomfort. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice rougher than usual. They will sentence me to a punishment. It is the way of the Kareth. Honor is everything. Without it, you are nothing. Her words hung in the air like a dark cloud, and Eli's heart clenched. He'd known her pride ran deep, but hearing her admit it out loud made the weight of the situation all the more real. You won't be nothing, Eli replied quietly. Not to me. And I'm not going anywhere. You said it yourself. We're in this together. Syrala turned then, her eyes meeting his. There was a flicker of something in them. Something soft but fleeting, before it was masked by the cold, distant mask of a warrior once more. You have no idea what it means to be Kareth, she said. You cannot understand the weight of my dishonor. Eli took a step forward, closing the gap between them. His voice dropped to a whisper, but the conviction in it was palpable. Maybe not, but I do understand what it means to stand by someone, to choose someone, even when it's hard, even when it seems impossible. For a moment, they stood in silence. The stars outside the viewport seemed to stretch on forever, and Eli felt the weight of space itself pressing on him, making him feel small and insignificant. But in that moment, standing next to Syrala, he didn't feel alone. There was something about her, something raw and real, that pulled him closer, even when it didn't make sense. Syrala finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. In the Kareth Dominion, you cannot choose your fate. It is chosen for you. I am no exception. But you're human, Eli replied softly, and humans get to choose. That's what makes us special. We get to make our own destiny. Her eyes softened just for a moment. Maybe you're right. The words were tentative, uncertain, but they were there. As the Kavalan slipped into the void of space, making its way toward the Kareth capital, the tension between them remained, but it was different now. There was something unspoken between them, a shared bond, fragile yet growing stronger with each passing second. When they arrived at the Kareth homeworld, the air was thick with tension. The planet's towering spires stretched into the sky, their black obsidian surfaces gleaming under the harsh light of twin suns. The atmosphere was harsh, the scent of alien flora heavy in the air, tinged with an unfamiliar sharpness that made Eli's throat tighten. The city below was a jagged maze of metal and stone, with no soft edges. Everything was a symbol of Kareth's strength, power, and control. Syrala had warned him what to expect, but standing on the surface of her home world felt like standing on the edge of a precipice. The city's towering architecture, the cold stares of her people, the overwhelming sense of being out of place, all of it pressing on him. Eli was surrounded by warriors, their eyes piercing, their bodies language steeped in pride. Syrala walked ahead of him, her back straight and her gaze unwavering, but there was an edge of fear behind her stoic expression. This was her world, yet she seemed like a stranger in it. They entered the trial hall, a grand chamber of obsidian stone where the Kareth leadership had gathered. The air was heavy with unspoken judgment, the scent of incense curling around their feet as they walked. As they approached the central dais, a figure stepped forward. Zalora, the high matriarch of the Kareth, regarded them with a cool gaze. Syrala, the Kareth Dominion, Zalora intoned, her voice like stone. You return to us after dishonoring the traditions of our people. You bring with you a human. This transgression is unforgivable. Eli felt the weight of her gaze upon him, sharp and unforgiving. He stood straighter, his eyes not leaving Zalora's as he spoke. I stand here with her, not as a human in their midst, but as someone who sees her for who she really is. There was a hushed silence. No one in the room expected a human to speak, much less to defy their laws. But Eli's words were out there now, and they hung in the air like a challenge. He had no idea what would happen next, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of what the Kareth might do. He was ready to fight for Syrala. Chapter 5. What surprised us both. The high chamber of the Kareth Dominion Tribunal was an intimidating sight, a vast and cold expanse of polished black stone, filled with towering statues of long-forgotten Kareth warriors, each one depicted in dramatic, powerful poses, their faces stern and unyielding. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense, sharp and almost metallic, mingling with the tension that hung over the room like a heavy storm cloud. Syrala stood at the center of the room, her back straight and her eyes fixed ahead, though the hard set of her jaw betrayed a nervous energy. She had dressed in ceremonial garb for the trial, a deep blood-red tunic of woven Kareth fiber, embroidered with the intricate patterns that marked her lineage. Her collar blade was sheathed across her back, but the ceremonial armor she wore could not hide the tension in her shoulders. Eli stood beside her, feeling as out of place as a human could possibly feel. The cold, high ceilings loomed above them, a reminder that they were in the heart of the Kareth Dominion. He could feel the weight of the stairs from the surrounding council members, the elders and warriors, sharp, unblinking eyes that seemed to look right through him. He swallowed hard, trying to suppress the sense of being completely dwarfed by their presence. Syrala of the Kareth Dominion. The voice of Zalora, the High Matriarch, rang out, her words echoing through the chamber with the weight of authority. She stepped forward from behind the raised dais, her long robe flowing as she moved. The Kareth elders, seated on a high platform above, all regarded Syrala with a quiet, intense scrutiny. You stand before this tribunal, accused of dishonoring the ancient traditions of your people. You have allied with a human, one of the lesser species of the galaxy. You have compromised the pride and integrity of the Kareth, and for this, you are unworthy of your name. Your fate is sealed. Chapter 6. A New Gravity. The stars outside the station's viewport had shifted since their arrival at the Kareth homeworld. From a massive Kavalan warship, the infinite darkness of space seemed more distant, even colder, than Eli had ever imagined. But it wasn't the stars that held his attention now. It was the quiet hum of the ship's systems, the soft pulse of artificial gravity beneath his feet, and the ever-present sense of change. The tribunal had spoken. Syrala had been given a chance to prove her worth. And as the Kareth Council had reluctantly agreed, the human, Eli, was allowed to accompany her, though his presence here would forever be viewed with suspicion by many. Eli leaned against the viewport, watching as Kareth ships of various shapes and sizes glided across the surface of their planet, landing and taking off with military precision. The capital city of Volthor stretched out below them, sprawling with its towering obsidian spires and intricately woven bridges that arced across wide, canyon-like gaps. Its architecture, grand and imposing, was as much a reflection of the Kareth philosophy as it was of their immense pride. Solid, unyielding, built for the ages. Syrala stood beside him, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon, but there was something different about her today. The lines of tension that had marked her face when they first arrived were gone. She still held herself with a warrior's grace, but there was a softness in her gaze now, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel until this moment. They had fought together, stood together, and through it all, they had discovered something neither of them had expected. Eli wasn't sure when it happened. Maybe it was in the middle of the battle against the mercenaries or the tense standoff in the tribunal. But somewhere along the way, the gap between them had closed. Now, in the silence of the ship's bridge, they stood side by side, not as a human and an alien, but as companions. Syrala, Eli said, his voice breaking the quiet. What happens now? She didn't immediately answer. Her gaze drifted over the Kareth landscape below, the spires and streets of Volthor glimmering like obsidian teeth in the fading light of the twin suns. For a moment, she looked distant, as if the weight of her future was pressing on her mind. But then she turned to him, her dark eyes locking onto his. "I don't know," she admitted. "The council has allowed me to prove myself, but that's all it is, an opportunity. I have to face the challenges they set before me, and I must do so alone. But the rules of the Kareth are harsh. If I fail, the consequences will be dire, not just for me, but for my people." Eli stepped closer, his heart pounding with the weight of her words. "You won't fail, Syrala. You're stronger than anyone I've ever met." A faint, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of her lips, but it was quickly masked by her usual stoic demeanor. Strength is not enough in the Kareth Dominion. It is loyalty that matters. Loyalty to the clan, loyalty to tradition. I have broken those bonds. And in the Kareth, once you're marked as dishonorable, it's almost impossible to erase. Eli shrugged, the movement casual, but his mind was racing. "Maybe I'm stubborn. Maybe I don't think you should be punished for thinking for yourself. I'm not saying it's easy, but..." He stopped, searching for the right words. "It's worth fighting for." Syrala's gaze lingered on him, her eyes softening just the slightest bit, before she looked back out at the sprawling city below. The soft hum of the ship's system seemed to intensify, filling the room with a faint sense of urgency. The Kavalan hummed beneath Eli's feet, its engines vibrating through the cold metal floor. A reminder that the journey wasn't over. Outside the viewport, distant alien constellations gleamed, their light 1,000,000 years old, casting ghostly reflections across the sleek, black walls of the starship. Neon-lit cities pulsed on distant worlds, the hum of interstellar life drifting from far-off systems. Yet, in this quiet moment, all that mattered was the space between him and Syrala. The trial had come to an end, but it wasn't the Kareth Dominion that decided Syrala's fate. It was her. She had chosen her path, defied tradition, and, in a way no Kareth had ever seen, shown them the true meaning of loyalty and strength. And she was free. Syrala stood by the viewport, staring out at the stars, her silhouette outlined against the endless black. The weight of everything they had been through hung between them. But now, it felt like something had shifted. The cold distance that had once defined her was gone, replaced by something warmer, something more human. Eli stepped closer, his boots barely making a sound as the artificial gravity kept him grounded. His hand brushed hers, the gesture simple but filled with unspoken meaning. He took a deep breath, the words that had been waiting inside him finally breaking free. "You don't have to be alone anymore," he said softly, his voice steady. "I'm not going anywhere." Syrala turned to face him, her eyes searching as for something. Confirmation, maybe, or a shared certainty. For a moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. "You've already given me everything," she replied, her voice quieter now, raw with emotion. "You're the one who's shown me that it's okay to choose, to be more than what I was meant to be."